How does Trey Lance change how you draft 49ers this season? Did we finally get some clarity on the Patriots' backfield? And who is the forgotten man on one NFC East team's passing attack? Plus, 27-time FFPC Football Guys and main event league champion, Mike Stanowski drops in to talk about Jacoby Myers, prepping for his debut in the FFPC Pros vs. Joe's competition, and much more. We've got a great show for you. Farrell Elliott is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hours start now.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now listening to the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com, with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here's Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Quiet Hollers. Remember to check out their music at quiethollers.com. Greetings and salutations, all you Balkaholics and Ferrelliacs. Welcome to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. I am, as always, your slightly above average host, Eric Balkman. My co-host is indeed the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, Farrell Elliott. Farrell, we have Football Guys leagues filling up. We have the Best Ball Tournament filling up. We have the KFFSC main event filling up. And as I look at it now, 7 spots remain in the final draft of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship Checkered Flag Championship that is drafting Wednesday night, along with yours truly in that draft. So we'll make it our goal to try to sell that out tonight, too.
Well, Balky, we can easily get that done because everyone will like a shot at the champion. And I get another opportunity to congratulate you on your fantastic play from last year. And, everyone loves the fact that you're there. And we have a draft coming up, I believe, Sunday night that is populated by Hudson Kern Reeve and the famed 26ers of the legendary Dynasty league in the FFPC. And so our broadcasting here is bringing in new players, and we're very, very grateful to have them partaking in Kentucky, as we are you, our checkered flag champion of 2020.
26er Nation truly is a nation. They are all over the place. Yes. They've invaded Vegas. They've invaded Kentucky. They're all over the place. And certainly we love them here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, with the exception of maybe the unofficial mascot of the show, Two-Packer. Not exactly the biggest 26er fan in the world, but I know he loves battling with them each and every year. Genesis, Revelation, so on and so forth. We have a great show for everybody tonight. We're going to wax poetic on the Bills' rushing attack. We're going to tell you how we think you should be reacting to the news coming out about Travis Etienne and Jacksonville and how you draft them in your Football Guys draft. We'll talk to Mike Stanowski for a little bit of his pros versus Joe's strategy. He is a first-time participant in the PBJ this year, but he's already got 27 main event, FFPC satellite leagues, and Football Guys league titles under his belt, along with a lot of best balls, too. So I think he's going to have an advantage. We're going to talk to him about how he plans to exploit that advantage over the pros when he drafts in the competition next month. Shout out to the chat room right now. We got a lot of good people in there, a lot of fan favorites. Kevin Williamson, Dave Gerzak, Hudson Kern Reeve, the aforementioned Hudson Kern Reeve in there tonight as well. If you guys have any questions, post them right in there. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, the show is at HSFFR. I am at Eric Balkman. The KFFSC is at KFFSC. Farrell is at J. Farrell Elliott. And Mike Stanowski is at, you guessed it, Mike Stanowski on Twitter. You can post on our Facebook page at facebook.com/HSFFR. If you want to give us a call, 347-426-3682. That's 347-GAME-OVA. You can always email the show at the inbox, highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you do have any questions for us or for Mike, Send them in now. This is your final chance. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can coming up in the fantasy feedback segment later on in the show. Thanks to our audio engineer, my best friend Bryce, and our producer and mutual friend Rob monitoring that. Want to remind everybody as we get the show going tonight, the Football Guys Players Championship well underway. $500,000 for first place, $100,000 for second, only a $350 entry fee. There are 2 spots left in the midnight draft tonight. Hopefully you can fill that, Hudson Kern-Reeve. And we will also tell you about the inaugural best ball tournament with the Fantasy Football Players Championship this year. $125 to get into that $550,000 prize pool, $100K for first place. Dynasty startup still filling up this weekend. And check out the best ball drafts, including the $5 Cinco de best ball options. We talked about the checkered flag, 7 spots left in the final draft there. But don't forget about the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship main event. Online, Cincinnati and Louisville. There is a spot for you. There's probably several spots for you there if you want to expand your territory, as the commish likes to say. Thanks to Football Guys, Draft Sharks, NBC Sports Edge, and Rob for tonight's Fantasy Flash. According to Nate Taylor, who covers the Chiefs for The Athletic, Farrell, they were using more multiple tight end sets so far this summer in minicamp, OTAs, and Noah Gray, who was their 5th-round rookie tight end, has actually been a standout during the team's minicamp. Travis Kelce had nothing but good things to say as Gray was lined up alongside Kelce in the starting offense. Remember, Sammy Watkins has moved on. He is no longer a Chief, and the Chiefs didn't really focus on the position in the draft or in free agency. This could mean more double tight end sets when the regular season gets here as well. Mahomes dropped back to pass 96 times last season with multiple tight end sets. That was for 899 yards and 9 touchdowns, no interceptions, and only took 1 sack. Now, Noah Gray, not a big, burly tight end, not the most athletic guy in the world, so he doesn't do anything great, but he does a lot of little things good. He set Duke's record for the most catches by a tight end in school history, and obviously catching passes from the latest Madden cover boy is not going to hurt him at all. I look at the Football Guys ADP over the last 5 days. Shout out to Darren Armani from FantasyMojo.com who compiles this for us, and I look at Noah Gray is not being selected. Now, once this news hits, I think he's going to be selected. Farrell, is this a 3rd tight end that you'd count on, or could he be more this year in Kansas City?
We're going to nip this in the bud. If I was running the Athletics website and gathering content, I think I would dock Nate Taylor a day's pay for this report and tell him to get to practice early and find some real information. I'm familiar with this player, and I was surprised to see him drafted, but this kind of player that's Kansas City Chiefs in all their glory and all their success can take a risk on. This is a converted high school quarterback. Now, you may say that he broke records at Duke as the all-time leading receiving tight end, but, you can call a player a tight end if he never lines up there. I don't know if he is a tight end or not. This guy's a slot receiver. He has no functional strength to play the tight end position, no bulk, no experience playing the tight end position. He's not going to block anyone from a slot receiver or a tight end position. I don't know what this player does for the Chiefs other than to maybe develop. He's probably got good hands, which is what you would expect from a converted quarterback. But, no, when we're going to talk about young players with the Kansas City Chiefs, alert Hudson Kern-Reeve and everyone else. There's a player on the Kansas City Chiefs roster. First name is Cornell, last name is Powell. If you want a rookie on the Kansas City Chiefs, there he is. It's not Mr. Gray.
Yeah, and Farrell, we are going to have you to thank when we talk about Noah Gray next time and see that he is still not being drafted in the Football Guys Players Championship. I can tell you that Cornell Powell is being drafted right now, wide receiver 91, going at the 1909, so clearly a flyer at the end of the draft. Comes from wide receiver U, essentially, in Clemson. He ran a 4.47 at his 40, has a 36.5-inch vertical jump. He actually, this past year, caught 53 passes on 78 targets, 880 yards, which is 16.6 yards per catch, and 7 touchdowns. That is a 74.1 receiving grade according to Pro Football Focus. And I think that, again, when we bring it back to Kansas City, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about people who are around the greatness of Patrick Mahomes and are going to benefit from a fantasy perspective simply by being in that offense. Cornell Powell certainly is a guy to watch there, and he's definitely on high-stakes players' radars as of right now as well. Moving on to San Francisco, Matt Mayoko, who covers the team for NBC Sports, says that Trey Lance is going to be given, quote, every opportunity to rise up the team's depth chart this summer. Mike McDaniel is the 49ers offensive coordinator. He said that they're getting Trey Lance ready to compete for the Week 1 starting quarterback position. He's learning the framework of Kyle Shanahan's offense right now. He's already taken a large number of the on-field practice snaps through 7 separate sessions in San Francisco. Say that 7 times fast. Trey Lance is going to be obviously a high pick among rookie quarterbacks, relatively speaking, when you talk about what he's capable of, even in his rookie year. If he is indeed named that Week 1 starter, Farrell, he's going as quarterback 14 right now at the 1401. That is right after Aaron Rodgers and Joe Burrow. It's right before the glut of Matt Ryan, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Fields. So my question here, and I think this is how we have to look at it, not necessarily about Trey Lance, because I think we all know what his ceiling is. Well, maybe we don't know what his ceiling is, and that in and of itself is a commentary on how high his ceiling could be. But when you look at Trey Lance, if he's the starting quarterback, Farrell, how does this change the fantasy values of Deebo Samuel, of Brandon Ayuk, of George Kittle, even Mostert? When you look at those players, those skill position guys in San Francisco, how do you adjust those players given where they're going now if Lance is indeed the starter?
They'll have to do exactly what we would have to do as fantasy players, and they would have to grow along with their player and determine what their role is going to be in support of this player. I would think that based on where he's drafted, I've talked to our good friend Bobby Sangerman about this many times. Sangerman always tells me he wants this player in the 14th round, that it's good. It's a good investment to take this player here and see what happens. And I have to agree with him. It's when you begin to target this player as your guy, because there's going to be some growing pains. Now, his skill level is undeniable, and he has tremendous room to improve. But across your 11, 12-week fantasy regular season, are you willing to have to go through the growing pains with him? So the other players, with what they had in San Francisco last year, Balky, a 6-10 record, which, by the way, gives them a 4th-place schedule and gives them some fairly easier matchups outside of division, but I digress. What you went through last year, all these players, they'll do better with any quarterback who plays the complete year and improves throughout the year. So I'm not concerned about the draft position of any of the other 49ers. I like where they're falling right now, with the exception of Kittle. But even considering Kittle, with what they'll have to ask him to do to help make Lance successful, he's still going to be a very big part of this offense. To answer your question, which I'm not sure, I've been talking so long now, I don't actually remember what it was. But I will tell you this. If you can draft Trey Lance in the 14th round, and that magic happens, and you can see that growth of a player as we move throughout the season, and you've got another quarterback on your roster to get your season started, you could have a really successful quarterback option moving through the playoffs in the FFPC, which is what you want. So you've got a late season starter. If he blooms just as much as he can, we have to remember 2020 for this ball player. He played against Central Arkansas, 1 game. So, there's a lot going on here that we have to see him. We have to see him on the field and just see how quickly all of this comes back to him. But undeniable talent, and, he's just really, really good. And that's about what you can say about him.
Farrell, we talked with Alex Palazzo last week, the Spearmint Rhinos, about Laviska Shenault. We didn't get a chance to go deep into what we think about the Jacksonville sophomore here. John Shipley for Sports Illustrated said that Darrell Bevell wants to develop Chenault as a, quote, pure wide receiver this offseason. Bevell is indeed the offensive coordinator for Jacksonville. Chipley says that he does think the Jaguars will still use Chenault as a backfield threat, but not as nearly as much as what we saw last year. Now, for reference's sake, he had 18 carries for 91 yards last year, usually with direct snaps from the center. He has apparently been looking awesome in the offseason practices for Jacksonville. Bear in mind that Jacksonville went out and signed Marvin Jones. They still have DJ Chark there as well. But when we look at his ADP, which is what it all comes down to, wide receiver 39 at the 808, that has not changed much, Farrell. It's right after Curtis Samuel and Tyler Boyd, right before Antonio Brown and Marquise Brown, the cousins, going back-to-back as receivers right now in the Football Guys Players Championship. Your thoughts on Chenault being developed as a receiver this year and less as a gadget player?
Yeah, I like that. Your tip as a coach, you see this guy walk in, and you look at him, he's 225, 300 pounds, and you see that the best thing about what happens in his game is after he gets the ball in his hands, how he runs with it. So naturally, you're going to try to get the ball in his hands sooner. Now, the names you mentioned, Jones and DJ Chark, still there, and the ability of the new quarterback to actually throw the ball down the field and take the defenses could bode very, very well for Chenault. Because if he can get open underneath, catch the balls, and then run, and he can run over linebackers, he can run through tackles. You're not going to tackle this guy with the ankles. He'll make safeties that are brought in to play in some of the packages that defensive teams have now. He'll leave them in the dust. So he is a player that I think a lot of people draft him not necessarily understanding who he is. 58 balls last year, 10 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. These are Cole Beasley numbers. So if you look at the numbers, you're overpaying for it. But at the same time, there is potential that he could move to an 80-catch player. There's potential that he could be a run-after-catch guy that is similar to some of the better running backs in the league. So, yes, Bevell has an understanding of how he wants to use players. He's an excellent offensive coordinator. I haven't drafted this player much, if at all, and I think I would like to, and I'm not ashamed to pay 8th-round draft capital for him.
Yeah, I mean, I've never, the thing is, I drafted Chenault twice in Dynasty last year, and it was kind of begrudgingly, just because I didn't like the injury history. I just was kind of not. I took him, but I wasn't excited about it. I think I've traded him in both leagues since then. So Trevor Lawrence is the Band-Aid that can cover all sores, right? And he can also turn a 6.8 player into an 8.2 player pretty quick on a scale of 0 to 10, because that's the talent he has. So I think when you're talking about looking to get players to outperform their draft stock, certainly Chenault has a much wider range of outcomes than a lot of the players going in that spot there, like Tyler Boyd, Antonio Brown, Curtis Samuel. Chenault definitely is a player that I'll want in a few spots in my leagues this year for sure. We have Mike Stanowski, who is going to be participating in the Pros vs. Joes competition this year, the 27-time FFPC Football Guys and Main Event League winner. Before we get to him, want to talk about this Bills running back situation, Farrell. Sean McDermott says he's looking forward to having Zach Moss ready for training camp, according to Joe Buscaglia on Twitter. Zach Moss had the ankle injury last year that caused him to have surgery on it in January. He is still rehabbing as mini camps are going on right now for Buffalo. He basically shared touches with Devin Singletary last year among Bills running backs. He had 156 carries. Devin Singletary had 112, but Singletary was the guy catching the passes there. McDermott says he's been impressed by Singletary so far. I'm just kind of curious if there is any sort of clarity for you on this situation for the Buffalo Bills running backs this year. And just before you answer that, I'll tell you right now, Devin Singletary, running back 49 at the 11:05. Zach Moss right now is going at the running back 40 at the 9:08. So Moss going about 2 full rounds before Singletary. who do you want to be in business with if you are forced to do business with a Bills running back?
I think drafters are really overpaying for Moss, especially since he's been injured here. Dak's had a very, very hard time staying healthy. He had that problem there at Utah, and now it seems to follow him to the NFL. Singletary, to me, is a guy that's an improving player. 29 catches in the first year. He pushed 40 catches last year. Now we could possibly look in as much as 50. His problem is either through the air or on the ground, he can't score the ball because of all the magnificent players that they have down around the goal line and the mobility of the quarterback. But I believe that Singletary in the 11th round is about as good as you're going to get for your money, with the opportunity that the job may become more his in certain matchups. So I think Singletary is a good investment in a double-digit round, and so that's where I would go.
Let's bring in our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen. He's been patiently waiting right now, and I want to bring him on right now. He is going to be competing in the 2021 Pros versus Joes competition for the very first time in his career. He's already won nearly 30 main event Football Guys and FFPC SAT leagues, and he's making his debut in PVJ. Please welcome onto the show the Paradox himself, Mike Stanowski. Mike, thanks not only for hopping aboard, congrats on getting your name called for the Pros versus Joes competition this year, man.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks, Paulky, and good to be on. Thanks for having me on the show, and can't tell you how excited I am for Pros versus Joes. Every year I wait for it, and it finally came. So, yeah, Christmas came early.
There you go.
Christmas did come early, and it's coming much earlier for us tonight because we get to pick your brain and figure out how you've won all these high stakes leagues. You'll bring us behind the Paradox curtain, as it were, and try to figure out how we can apply some of the tactics, some of your thoughts into our own leagues, and try to win as much as you have. Before we do get into fantasy football, I want to ask you about what you're doing for a living right now. And take as long as you need to explain this, because I think you have a very interesting work life when you are not drafting all these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first part of it is pretty standard. I work for Logitech and for Blue Microphones. I work as the head of customer experience there. So, hey, you guys need microphones, you know who to call. That's my day job. And then I've been involved with a startup for about the last year. It's really ramped up over the last few months. We're doing a startup called Center Stage, and serving the trading card and the sports cards community that, although it had massive growth recently, I've always been a collector, both sports cards, namely basketball on my end, some more nerdy games and all that. So a few of us got together. We have a rock star team on the technical side, and we're looking to build something special for the card collecting space. There's going to be AI involved, some really cool stuff that if any of you all are collectors, please do feel free to reach out to me. I can tell you more.
All right, so
that's fantastic.
And there certainly will be people I think that would definitely be interested in that. I'm curious as to a couple of things here right up at the top. This is, I believe, your fifth year playing at the high stakes level, and you started off with a couple of friends, John Bredecka and Matt Marcoux. I believe I'm pronouncing Matt's last name right. I specifically want to ask you about Matt. Okay, perfect. Because Matt has already played in Pros versus Joes before. I'm curious if you guys have shared any conversations about what that experience was like for him and any advice he gave you.
Yeah, we have a little bit, but I'm going to pick his brain a lot more because we're just starting to ramp up. It's been a bit of a weird year, and kind of with COVID ramping down and visiting family, actually getting a little bit of a late start on fantasy, but no, I know he was I know he's involved, so I haven't picked his brain too much yet. I'm very familiar with best ball, as you might know, but yeah, it's a whole different ball game when getting in the Pros versus Joes and some of these high stakes leagues. They're a lot more competitive, and I think overall my idea is the draft is probably not going to fall to me. So we're going to have to get a little bit crazy, and that's what we specialize in. So, hey, I'm happy to be a part of it.
Now, Farrell wants to ask you about stacking. Farrell, I'm going to interrupt you just for real quick here. I know you want to ask about stacking with Mike, but Mike, just real quick, you have an interesting outlook in regards to ADP. Now, ADP with the FFPC has been going on basically, I mean, this is like month 6 we're in, almost month 7, where the ADP has formulated. It's shifted, obviously, with free agency, the NFL draft and everything. Talk a little bit about, right up at the top, why you personally stay away from that information, why you don't want to know what ADP is for the first, 4 or 5 months of drafting season.
Right. Yeah. So it's something I'm actually trying new that I tested out last year. Last year I took it to an extreme, and it was more of an opportunity where, again, 2020 was going to be lower volume for me. So I said, well, let's see kind of how this plays out. I've noticed myself making the most mistakes when I take ADP kind of at face value and let that dictate my draft strategy, or really where I value players. And what I wanted to really try this year is not quite the extreme of 2020 where I really ignored as much as possible. Once I do go into draft season, I don't discount it entirely. The reason I don't want to look at it initially is as I'm going through all the rosters and going through the process of applying different factors and variables I look at of what do I think is going to happen and why, I want that to come first, and then I want ADP to come second, and to look at it, because once I see the board, it's really I can't unsee it, right? So I want to look at it with virgin eyes, for lack of a better term, and go into the first draft like, whoa, okay, this is way different. I will say I cheated a little bit today, but yeah, that's the overall premise, that I want to be able to go in really dictating what my idea is, and then adapting from there and seeing where the market really differs from what my initial idea was.
And you said you cheated a little bit today?
I did a little bit.
A little bit? Well, you're entitled, because as a lifelong Raider fan, I will tell you, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So that's been their mantra for years. And I love this. The fact that you're walking away from ADP, I've given the quote to Two-Packer, Ron Meyer, for so long. Average draft position means average fantasy football team. And I love it, and I preach to everyone. Go get your guys. Believe in what you see happening, not how you see the board. And, you don't want to overpay for anything. I have guys that I'm standing next to in Las Vegas, and they say, I don't care about ADP. I said, okay, well, then quit looking at this board. Why are you standing in front of this board? Let's go somewhere else. But, I just have been I love hearing that, and that's what I think it gives a much more enjoyable drafting experience when you are drafting a clear head and have the guys that the talent that you see, and that could lead to a little bit of overpaying. But hey, if they deliver in the points, no one's going to look back and see where you drafted the player that delivered you a championship. I've drafted a lot this year, and more so than I ever dreamed that I would get the opportunity through with the FFPC slow drafts. And it has been a blast. And guys, there was a time in my life that I look back fondly on where Stacked had nothing to do with fantasy football. Provided some sort of stimulation, but had absolutely nothing to do with fantasy football. Now we get into a situation where it seems that stacking players from the same roster is a big, big strategy. It's not a huge strategy for me. Sometimes I see it falling to me, and I go ahead and take advantage of it. Can you talk to me about how you use that strategy? Is it something you embrace? And do you do it with more than one team in a 20-round draft? I know you do it in your best balls, but will you do it in the FFPC main event as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate the distinction because that's something I was going to talk about is FFPC versus best ball. I know this is becoming more and more popular, and I really last year was the year I noticed a lot more people doing stacks, and I would say I'd answer with it depends, and I'll give you guys a little food for thought as well, I think, after I answer. So to break it down, I look at my fantasy teams in two different layers, right? So kind of going into like stocks and equities and all that, you think of like a portfolio, right? And you have a portfolio of different teams, and I do want some representation of stacks within that portfolio. Then individual teams are also portfolios of players, right? So that also has to make sense. And for me, what I come down to is if I'm doing a massive stack, which I have done, there are a couple of things we all want to consider. And one of those is keep in mind it's a weekly game, right? So that stack might work great one week, might not work great another week. If you're in season long, there's more of an opportunity cost to that versus best ball. And the reason is this. Consider a team has, I guess, like an expectation of a certain number of points it's going to score, right, among skill position players. So if you have a handful of receivers, you have running backs, QBs, and there's some crossover there, but the skill position guys, they're going to score on their own, and they're going to take away from other guys. So you're inherently limiting your ceiling. If you go too heavy, there's a chance you're limiting your ceiling. And if you're relying on that strategy week to week in a season-long league where you have to set your lineup, that's going to put you in some tricky spots, not to mention the bye. I'm not saying not to do it. There's definitely a place for it. But if you're only doing a handful of teams, I wouldn't go out of my way to do a stack. Now, in best ball, if it starts lining up, that's when we start pulling the trigger. And again, it has to make sense from a roster construction standpoint.
Talking to Mike Stanowski, the Pros vs. Joe's drafter in 2021. You can listen to him draft his team live on this show coming up next month when we get those drafts underway. 2-hour shows. We'll have all 6 of the live drafts covered on this program. But as long as we have Mike here on the program tonight, I want to pick his brain on a bunch of stuff, including the New England Patriots running back situation. Now, over the last decade plus, it's usually been a fool's errand trying to figure out who the quote-unquote guy is going to be in that backfield. But are we getting some clarity on it this year? Could Damian Harris be the guy that you want to target right now? What are your thoughts on him becoming that, that every down guy, the guy to own in the Patriots backfield, Mike?
Yeah, so the more things change, the more they stay the same, right, Balky, with the Patriots.
Right.
So yeah, with Belichick, I feel like Belichick, and I've always kind of had this joke with Bill Belichick, where it feels like he goes to like a backyard barbecue, and he sees some guys playing Nerf football, right, and he sees a guy break a couple tackles, and 2 weeks later they're in a 4-man rotation on the New England Patriots. So considering the history, it's hard to accept it. I would say at the right price, I'm okay with it, but there's no way, until I see it, there's no way I'm going to believe it.
I tell you something that you really can believe is in the Dallas Cowboys from 2020 before Dak went down with an injury. I rolled across NFL Network, and being broadcast was the replay of the game from September 27th against Seattle, and I said, I'm going to watch a few minutes with this. And a few minutes became 2.5 quarters, because that was the game where Prescott threw the ball 57 times. Ezekiel Elliott could not get going. Of those 57 attempts, he completed 37 of them. He pushed 500 yards for that game. It was a very well-played defensive game by Seattle, but Prescott found a way to move and consequently score the ball. They took away Cooper. Lamb was a little limited, but showed great promise of what he and Prescott could accomplish. And then Gallup had the biggest game, his biggest single game for the year. So, 2 weeks later, Dallas and the Giants are playing, and we lose Prescott for the year, and all this became quickly forgotten. But it was very interesting looking back on it. And as we get prepared for this year's draft, all of these players I find very enticing. When you talk about we go back to our previous conversation about a stack, that the Dallas Cowboys would be a perfect team to stack because they've just got so much offense. I think the final of that game was 38-31. Even this offense could not keep up with that the Dallas defense and Lockett and DK Metcalf running back for touchdowns. So my point is this: am I right to say they're going to take up where they left off in 2020? And do we expect 30-point games and 400-yard passing games from Prescott to be the norm this coming year?
Yeah, I was super high on Dallas last year. I did own plenty of shares of Dak, and yeah, it was really sad what happened to him. Of course, fantasy being fantasy, just on a personal level, just seeing that was horrible because he was having a phenomenal year and carrying that team. In terms of this year, I do think they can pick up where they left off. I do think there are a couple question marks this year that I have that I want to see clear. That again depends on the pricing and depends how those player ADPs kind of change. But yeah, I mean that offense is lethal, and it's TBD though, because again, offensive line. We're going to have to see how that comes together, how healthy they are. I think the improvement of the defense can impact it a little bit as well. And then just seeing how Dak's moving around. Those three things are the factors I'm going to be looking for to see where I kind of gauge last year versus this year. But in terms of potency, if they clear all the hurdles, yeah, I mean, that could be a top offense in the league.
I agree.
Mike, the WASP guy himself, Hudson Kern-Reeve, has a question from the chat room. He wants to know your thoughts on how the value for both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon would or would not change if Aaron Rodgers does not play for the Packers this year.
Yeah, I do think it impacts it, and it impacts the Packers across the board. Rodgers has been this QB that, at least over the last few years, he himself has not always been a top-tier QB, but he's really enhanced that offense around him and created scoring opportunities much more so than what I think Jordan Love can, or really any replacement QB can for Rodgers. So, yeah, if Rodgers is out, again, I wouldn't completely pull the plug on the Packers offense. Just that coaching staff, the way they're built, and what they want to do, I still think it will be there, but naturally scoring chances can be expected to come down with Rodgers out of town, though.
Let's move on and talk about the switch conferences. We're going to talk Miami Dolphins. Will Fuller, Devontae Parker, Jalen Waddle. Without revealing their ADP to you, not knowing where they're going, which one are you more likely to select this season once Pros versus Joes gets going? Excuse me, and we get closer and closer to the start of the season, Mike, between Parker, Waddle, and Will Fuller for Miami.
Yeah, so ADP will play into it, of course, but out of those three names, the one I crossed off the list right away, and it's so painful because I've loved Will Fuller for so long, but yeah, I just don't see the dynamic there for him to really exceed. If the price is right, maybe, but I cross him off the list. I think initially, and this is going to feel really weird to say with the history of Devontae Parker, but out of those three, I think right now I would pick Parker. But I will be on the lookout, and part of the reason I love seeing camp get started, I will want to see the connection between Tua and Jalen Waddle, because my answer could flip really quick if they have good chemistry there.
I like what you're doing there, Mike. We can always get behind Parker here in Louisville, Kentucky. product of Ballard High School right down the street from where I'm studying in University of Louisville, so we like that answer. So stay with Parker, and he'll deliver for you. It's hard to imagine the Dolphins with this great group of wide receivers, and we stay in the same division, and we move up the coast, and we end up in New England, and look at what they've got at wide receivers. And I apologize for having to ask you the second New England Patriot question, but I'm going to ask you. And it's somewhat ludicrous because, and I don't want to steal your thunder when I begin to talk about this player, but I would like to know your thoughts of wide receiver 1708 over the last 5 days of the Footballguys Championship. Wide receiver 73, Jacoby Myers. What can you tell us about Jacoby Myers and our FFPC players, drafters? Are they correct in passing on him until the 17th round?
Yeah, when I saw that, I thought it was pretty crazy, just from the get-go. Now, if I unpack that a little bit, and I have been, of course, looking at rosters, and if Cam's the starter there, I think that's too low, no matter what. Now, how much of the lack of targets last year, or the lack of alternative options last year, led to the target share for Jacoby? Him and Cam seem to have a bit of a connection. That's undeniable, I think, in my mind. One thing to factor in, though, is Belichick's got 2 tight ends again that they could throw to. So that is something to consider. At that price, though, again, I think that risk is priced in, and it does come down to roster construction a bit. Is Myers going to be someone that is going to elevate your roster like an FFPC to league winner? Probably not with the way that they're built, but he will be a guy that will fill in and give you solid floor weeks if we see the continuation of the trend last year, and also bake in some of the regression in targets going to some of the other players, especially the tight ends.
We're talking with Mike Stanowski here from the 2021 Pros versus Joes class, winner of 27 FFPC main event Footballguys leagues over the course of his high-stakes career dating back over the last 4 years. Congratulations on being selected once again. Mike, you've already won numerous best ball leagues over the years. Can you kind of share a little bit of the strategy that I know you've already shared some of it, especially when we were talking about stacking, but can you share some of the strategy when you're going to try to win a free main event team for next year in a slim draft format made up of 5 other FFPC Joes and 6 industry pros that may or may not be familiar with this type of league?
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy experience. I'll tell you that. It'll depend on the draft slot a bit. Out of certain slots, I feel like the draft can kind of fall to me, and I could fall into a strategy that I prefer. In strategy, I mean roster construction. But given the dynamics and given we do have pros in this, and really, a bunch of really good players, I expect, it may be time for something crazy, right? If the draft really does not start falling to me, I'm going to revert to my guys, and I might go with a pretty crazy strategy, and especially in terms of roster construction. I think that's one thing that I've been willing to push the boundary of in best ball traditionally, is not being afraid to maybe go a little bit outside of the norm for roster construction. Of course, generally speaking, yeah, like your best chances are going to be within a certain kind of framework, but again, it really depends. It depends on a lot. I'm excited to see how it goes because, I'm going to go in there once I know the draft slot. I'm going to have kind of a game plan, but I'm also going to know it's probably going to get crazy. And at the end of the day, I think my goal is to have Darren to odds makers put me as one of the bottom or the top. I really don't want to be anywhere in the middle.
Wherever you are, bottom, top, middle, let me ask you something. We've continued to talk about the Jacksonville team on every show that we've had. And I think Balky agrees with me. The more we talk about them, the more we kind of start to really like them. But, everybody likes the rookie running back at the end. How often are you going to be targeting this player? Is he a player that you see special value to? Do you have an idea how he's going to be used? Or does it even matter? Do you like the way his physicality, his speed, his draft position in the NFL? Are you ready to go in business with Travis and stay in business with him in this 2021 season?
Yeah, so this is one I did cheat on and checked ADP on. I do like him where he's going. I will say that there's actually a variable here that kind of plays in that isn't even related to him, and it kind of affects running backs in that kind of range he's in. And that's whether or not I agree with the ADP of the wide receivers above him, right? So really like that 3 to 12, 3 to 16 range. If I think the market's way off on the receivers, I will probably be more apt to go running back early and probably end up with less shares than I'd like of Etienne. But a player at his ADP right there and with the potential upside, yeah, I'm with you guys. I think there's value there. And I don't know what point he would have to get to for me to really not consider him. So he's in a good spot right now.
Let's go to a couple of emails that we got from listeners, Mike. The first one is from Drew in Salt Lake City. He says, what's up, Mike? How should FFPC drafters handle Houston Texans in their drafts with so much cloudiness at the quarterback situation? That is Drew in Salt Lake City. Drew, thanks for listening. Thanks for the email. Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Texans. They got some players down there that are being drafted fairly high in the FFPC, and David Johnson and Brandon Cooks. But we don't know exactly who the quarterback's going to be. Tyrod Taylor, Deshaun Watson, somebody else, I don't know. But how would you advise drafters to handle those players in Houston right now, given the unknowns of that offense?
Yeah, this is one team that when I initially took a look at, there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of unknowns on this team, but unknowns also breed opportunity. I'm at the point right now, I don't think I'd overpay, especially with the receiving core. I think that QB situation can really swing which receivers really succeed. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and since we're talking about Houston, I'll talk about Kiki Cutie a little bit. He's on my list for deep sleepers, really more for best ball, but maybe like 20th round of a draft or something like that. I don't know where he's going exactly right now. I do expect there will be some success there, but right now, as it stands, it's going to be pretty hard to pin down. I also see Philip Lindsay on that list, and that running back core, again, Ingram's a little bit older. David Johnson hasn't been able to stay healthy, so I do think there's some opportunity there, but I don't know how high I'm willing to go right now on Houston, given the unknowns. And really, if, for example, if Watson is announced as the starter, is that going to catapult these players up all of a sudden? I'm not really sure. So I'm not really in a rush to draft these players because I don't really expect too much movement, with the exception of potentially camp and starting to see some of these players, like I mentioned, maybe Cutie or Lindsay moving up the board. Those are really the two I'm most concerned about.
Mike, one more email from the listeners. This is, I think you kind of already answered it. I'm just going to read it anyway because it's just a piggyback on what you're already saying. Is Philip Lindsay being undervalued right now? I seem to be getting him everywhere. Thank you, Tony in Columbus, Ohio. And for just the sake of the listeners here, Philip Lindsay right now going as running back 51 at the 1301. We heard several reports coming out of Houston that he could end up being the starter over David Johnson. And I understand that the Texans' offense isn't exactly sexy, but to get a starting running back in the 13th round, if that is indeed who he ends up being, would certainly be a big boon for your running back depth. Philip Lindsay, 13th round, does that seem about right to you, or is that too late?
Yeah, it does, and it may be a little late. I hate to say that because it'll it'll hurt me a little bit too. But No, this is about the time to be buying, I think, if you are going to buy, and it's an advantage of drafting early too, because if you look at like where the volatility is going to be in that team, you can consider Lindsey maybe moving down a couple of rounds. Maybe I don't even see that happening. The opportunity for him is really going to be upward, unless he gets injured or something like that. So, yeah, great question. And again, read my mind as I was talking about it too. Yeah, I like that spot for Lindsey.
Mike, I wouldn't do this show if I didn't get to ask this question every week. So this thrills me, and I think you are probably going to give us one of the most valuable answers that Balky and I have heard to this question, because I think you can find, even with Jacoby Myers, I think you can find something positive to say about almost any player. So I'm going to ask you to turn on one player, to turn your back on one player in the league that you will avoid at any cost. And then I'm very interested in hearing your sleeper. I'm hoping it's a rookie, but I really think your sleeper will be well thought out and hopefully aligns with some of mine. So there you go. Somebody you just can't stand, and that sleeper that you're dying to roster.
It's a tough one this year.
I've stumped you, Balky. I like it.
I'll
fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you this. So I'll tell you my initial gut reaction to hearing where some of the tight ends were going, and in particular Kyle Pitts. And I know this is going to be it might be a very unpopular opinion. I don't see early third round for him. I don't see like late second, early third for him, even late third with some of the players going behind him, and some of the opportunity for more established guys. Again, I love the player, but again, rookie tight end that high, it feels like all of the potential upside is already priced in there. So again, that was my initial gut reaction of all the players I looked at. Like, man, that is an extremely steep price to pay for Pitts.
And that
any sleepers that you're targeting too, Mike? I know you mentioned Lindsey, but is there anybody else?
Yeah, so Lindsey is one. There may be a guy that isn't talked about too much, and I might hate giving this name up, honestly, but I'll give it to you guys for having me on, and that's going to be Quintez Cephas.
Yes.
I like the fit there. There's an opportunity. If you look at Goff's history, who he likes to throw to, you look at Cooper Kupp. Again, it's going to be a different offense, right? But I do think there's an opportunity there. The coaching staff kind of coincides with it. So I did actually look that one up specifically for you again. I think he's going around the 18th right now. So he is being drafted in FFPC leagues, but yeah, that could be one that, again, I don't know if I'd expect him to really be a league winner. That might be within his range of outcomes, but he's going to be a guy like that can slot in your lineup, right? If you're having some trouble mid-season, early season, and all of a sudden you find, hey, Cephas is getting 6 to 8 targets a game, right? And he could provide you a solid floor. I expect him to be that kind of player. There's an off chance that goes higher. Of course, Hawkinson being there is going to be a wild card, but I think there's enough there for Cephas to eat a bit and to be a good solid floor guy when you need him.
Thank you, Mike. I think that's the first Cephas question. That's the first Cephas commentary that we've had, Balky. Am I right? I don't remember one. That's very good.
No, we haven't unless I brought him up, because I have him in a bunch of my dynasties. I've been taking him at the end of some best ball leagues too, because I do like. Well, I mean, he's a Wisconsin Badger, so obviously I got to see this guy play, quite a bit following his career for Wisconsin, and I just look at the guys ahead of him. I mean, Perriman, I guess the reports on him haven't been very good. Tyrell Williams is in the training room as much as he's on the field. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I know it's very exciting to talk him up, but I know there's plenty of smart people I've talked to that aren't necessarily very high on him this year either. So I think the opportunity is definitely there for Cephas, and part and parcel it goes with the ADP, right? I mean, 18th round, whatever, you might as well. That makes a lot of sense there. So I'm a fan of that pick. I'm a fan of Mike Stanowski, ladies and gentlemen, who is going to be competing in Pros vs. Joes next month. Mike, we would love to, if you are drafting live, when you do your draft, we'd love to have you call back in and maybe make a pick on the air. Tell us a little bit how the draft is going, because after hearing from you tonight, I feel like we got some insight in how you like to build these teams and the players that you like to utilize when you do it. So we certainly appreciate that. We will all follow you on Twitter at Mike Stanowski, and say hi to Bill Murray for us as well, all right?
Will do, guys. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and absolutely I'll call in. And, you guys have a good rest of your night. Thanks for continuing to run the show. I enjoy your guys' content, so keep it rolling.
Thank you, Mike. We definitely will. The Paradox, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Stanowski, drafting in Pros vs. Joes this upcoming July. So a lot of good, we've been having a string of, well, not that we've ever had really bad guests on, Farrell, but we've been having a string of really thought-provoking guests over the last month or so. And Mike Stanowski was not dissimilar from that ilk. I think it's interesting that he does not pay attention to ADP until he really gets heavily involved in the draft, the sort of the second half of drafting season. And then he said something too. When we're talking about the Texans, and he said there's a lot of unknowns there, obviously, but he said unknowns breed opportunity. And sometimes I think in fantasy, it's easy for us to write off a team because if we don't understand it or we're not sure how it's going to work, it's so easy for us to stay away from it. But sometimes instead of running away from a situation, it pays to, on a cost-benefit ratio, it pays to be running towards it. And I think certainly there's some Texans that might be worth running towards given their current ADPs right now.
Yeah, that's who you want to watch in the preseason. That's who you want to understand. We talked about the beat writer, McLean, who has a better understanding of his team that he covers than any other beat writer in all of football writing. And if I thought that Mike was only going to draft one team, I would go to the bar with him and I would say, look, I got to talk you out of Jacoby Myers. But, he's going to figure that one out on his own. I think it is amazing that Jacoby Myers is being drafted at 17.8, and I can call that a travesty of overpay. This is a guy that probably should stick at the back end of the roster, and just like us, Balky, he's on the Patriots and contributing to the Patriots because no one else was available. And I mean, but there's a player that I can't see any utility for, but maybe Mike can. And I think I'm right about this player, and I think there's better players out there, and that's what he did by naming Cephas, who is a fantastically interesting player. And, we had a guest on and previously and made the statement, Jacksonville's going to be a terrible football team. As you say, run towards opportunity. I don't think they are. And I think they're going to be far from anything terrible when it comes to fantasy football because they've got too many players that can score the ball and move the ball. So I think Jacksonville, I think Houston, these teams, Detroit, a lot of question marks, and we'll see, but you don't have to pay for it. But in New England, it's tried and true, and it did not work last year, and I don't think that's going to work this year.
I'll tell you what I hope works this year is repeating for me in the checkered flag competition with the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. And, Farrell, I think I got my good luck charm today for the checkered flag. Now, the checkered flag competition at KFFSC, inspired by the Indy 500, is it not?
Yes, sir, it is.
So today on my local Northeast Wisconsin radio show, The Show with Leo and Balky, weekdays 2 to 3 on 95.3 and 99.1 FM The Score. You can listen live at those frequencies or download the Score mobile app for free in the App Store or Google Play or listen to the stream at thescorew.com. Today, I got a chance to interview two-time Indy 500 winner, Takuma Sato. And I didn't bring up the checkered flag competition. Yes, I did. I did not bring up the checkered flag competition with him. But as I'm talking to him about this, I'm kind of like, this is a good omen. That I'm talking to one of the 20 people one of the 20 people who walked planet Earth that have won the Indy 500 more than once. And here I am on the eve of drafting a checkered flag team this coming Wednesday, and I'm talking to Takuma Sato. So that was pretty awesome. I feel like this could be my year again. If you feel it isn't, then I encourage you to run, don't walk, and to kffsc.com, register for that last checkered flag league that is drafting Wednesday, June 30th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If that does fill, don't forget about the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship main event. Draft online, draft live in Cincinnati, draft live in Louisville. Spots open there as well. Farrell, can't thank you enough for coming on board tonight. I can't wait to welcome in a bunch of the HSFF Hour listeners to the KFFSC this year as well. Going to be an exciting, fun year after what we went through in 2020. It's going to be a great fantasy football year this year.
2020 got us ready, and we're going to have a wonderful year in 2021, Balky, and you're exactly right. And after we finish here, we'll head to the FFPC in Vegas along with numerous of our Kentucky players to compete there for that $500,000. I can't wait for these weekends to get here. Oh, my goodness, I got a lot of work going on there.
Well, I'm going to let you do that work right now. We'll reconvene next Friday at 10/9 Central. Sound good to you?
I'll see you then, buddy.
Farrell Elliott, ladies and gentlemen. You follow him on Twitter at @JFarrellElliott. The Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship is at KFFSC.com and at KFFSC on Twitter. Good stuff from Farrell there. Always appreciate his insight. Good stuff from Mike Stanowski, and I want to thank both those guys for popping onto the show tonight once again. I want to thank FFPC, Rob, Bryce, of course, each and every one of you for hanging out in the chat room tonight, streaming this around the world whenever you're listening to it. Thanks so much for doing that. I certainly appreciate it, as does Farrell. Next Friday, we will be back at 10/9 Central, another 2021 Pros versus Joes drafter. It's Jay Harding, who has won 5 Football Guys League championships, and you can follow him on Twitter at You Don't Win on D-Day. So Jay Harding will be on the show next week. Cannot wait to talk to him about Pros versus Joes and how his drafts have been going this season as well. Register for the inaugural best ball tournament with the FFPC today. Register for the Football Guys Players Championship. I noticed that midnight draft is filled. We will reconvene with Football Guys draft tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Hop in those. It's going to be a fun little Saturday. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, including my own father, who listens to this show, I believe. We'll find out tomorrow when I talk to him. Don't forget about the Football Guys Early Bird expiring in 12 days.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, presented by MyFFPC.com. It was broadcast live and heard around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, interviews, and advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.
As a reminder, too, the Football Guys Players Championship, I know I talk about that early bird a lot. I don't think I talked about it too much in depth tonight, but remember, if you register a team in the FPC before the end of the month and then you draft it before July 15th, you automatically get a free $35 FFPC team credit into your account, which you can use on a best ball, slim, what have you. And you can do that up to 3 times. So essentially, it's like $100 in free FFPC credits. It's well worth it, especially if you're a volume drafter. Make sure you're getting in early, taking advantage of the value that's out there. Remember what Mike Stanowski says, unknowns breed opportunity, and there's plenty of opportunity out there right now to win $500,000. Happy Dad's Day. We'll talk to you again next Friday with Jay Harding. Thanks for listening, everybody.